Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's corporate ONS meeting. It's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to get this meeting started. I'm Councillor Graham Snell, and I'll be your chair for this evening. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication to the Council's website. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Lucy, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies tonight, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy. Minutes. I move that the minutes of the Corporate Owners Committee held on the 8th of March 2022 to be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No. Okay, then the minutes are approved. Okay. Item 3, urgent business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business. Item 4. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay. In that case, you move straight into item 5, which is the asset review. And that's on pages 13 to 74 of the agenda. And can I ask David Johnson to present the report, please?
Sorry, I'm new to the system, so I hope I'm live and you can hear me. Thank you very much, Chair. This is part of a report going to Cabinet, or proposed to go to Cabinet with your consent, relating to the 3 hours programme. First report, I think, was brought forward last July. It's to extend on the success of that report, which in the last financial year has generated 9.3 million in capital receipts, and to further look at rationalisation, if I can speak properly, of the Council's property portfolio. Essentially to ask your consent to declare a number of properties surplus to requirement. It's split into 4 sections, 4 appendices. The first being pieces of land that council hold which are considered to have no beneficial use or could do with planning of some sort of planning improvement for a greater beneficial use to either increase revenue or gain a capital receipt. The Appendix 2, which is operational properties and consists of some children's centres that have been rationalised into other properties so that services can continue their services but we can reduce our revenue expenditure. Appendix 3 is a collection of, in fact, all the Scouts halls that are currently leased to the Scouts Association, and it's proposed that these are given or gifted to the Scout Association for a peppercorn and nil receipt. And lastly, Appendix 4, which is our village halls holding, which again is proposed given away to the village hall committee groups or trustees, again for a nil receipt so that they can better utilise them and access funding that we can't. So I don't know whether, Chair, if you want me to run through individual properties to give you a highlight as to why they're in there or answer any questions.
I think it would be helpful for the committee if you do maybe one from each section, just
give
us an idea of how that feels.
No problem, thank you, Chair. So if we start with, well, I'll probably get into a run, so I'll just talk until you tell me to stop in terms of why they're in there. The first is a property in Purfleet. It's colloquially known as Fosa. It's on Tank Hill Road. It's an industrial property. It's under rented and is suitable for a redevelopment scheme in terms of housing. It's envisioned that this would be looked at by the council as either housing regeneration or TRL in terms of development, and if it was not suitable for those, that we could dispose of for a capital receipt. Next you have Buckingham Hill, which is a former landfill site that surrounds a civic amenity site. It's a rather large site, 52 acres. It's remained fallow since it was ceased use as a landfill site, and it's again envisions that actually there would be some sort of planning gain or beneficial use that we could put it to, whether that be on a leasehold or a freehold basis, but ideally looking at a freehold revenue income off that site. The third on this appendix is a former depot site at Curzweil Drive. It was buildings were demolished approximately 3 years ago, and it's sat unused since that point because those buildings were unusable because of their age and quality. It's actually quite a valuable site in terms of revenue. It would generate something in the order of £170,000 in terms of a leasehold rental income. And because of those figures, it needs a decision from Cabinet to dispose of, so it wouldn't be a freehold disposal. Next, we have a group of public houses. I won't propose to go through all of them. but most of them are either assets of community value or have lengths of time remaining on the leases on them. So it's considered that the council would struggle to develop these in a profitable fashion, and there's been many inquiries from the current leaseholders about purchasing those assets. So in terms of accessing the benefit that they can bring to the market, it would be easier for the owners or public house companies to actually get some planning gain on those sites. So not as beneficial for us. Propose that they're all disposed of. There's also a site which is part of the Purfleet regeneration area that we are looking at potentially leasing out on a short-term basis, so it won't impact on the potential redevelopment of the Purfleet area, but it's a significant amount of revenue that would be gained. So again, it's on there from a leasehold point of view because of the delegations in terms of the amount of money it would generate on a leasehold basis. That's Corrie's Wharf. Then you have 2 residential care homes currently let to Runwood Homes, which the council is slightly conflicted on, in our view, in that they're the main client and also the freeholder. So in terms of managing those leases from a financial point of view, it's difficult because of the conflict with the care contract, and they're considered to be under rented by about £100,000 to £125,000 per annum. So again, in terms of accessing that extra value, it would be much easier for the council to do that through a disposal and still remain the client for the care homes. The land adjacent to Essex Arena is currently lying fallow, and again, this is one of those ones where we're looking for the option to perhaps have a planning gain there of some sort to explore possibilities to either increase revenue. But in order to do that, it again, likewise needs a cabinet decision because of the delegations. Then there's the land north of Tank Hill Lane on Purfleet, which is a strip of land left over by residential developments either side. Again, potentially one for a residential development scheme, so ideally offered to the council's HRA or TRL, and then if not suitable for those, disposal to open market. Then there's a small piece of land, former site of Whiteacres on Dagenham Drive, which again has remained fallow for years, and it would be suitable for a small residential development, again either HRA, TRL, but then to the open market. That completes Appendix 1. Appendix 2, you've got Averley Children's Centre and Stamford Hope Children's Centre. So I'll start with Averley, sorry. It's a former Victorian school building. It's very revenue and capital expenditure heavy for the council. I think that the combined cost for both children's centres in a year is approximately £150,000 per annum, even though there's parts of those properties that are leased out. It's considered again that due to their age and their use as a nursery within parts of those buildings, that the council isn't perhaps the best landlord in terms of operating them effectively, and there's a significant amount of capital that could be generated because of the interest in nursery settings in terms of freehold disposals. So it would generate a capital receipt substantially and reduce our revenue expenditure of about £150,000 per annum without affecting the ongoing use of those nurseries who would remain as leaseholders. Purfleet Children's Centre is also on there because it's had expressions of interest from the community, and there might be a potential a disposal to them at some point in the future, depending on how Children's Services go about their use in conjunction with the community, which I understand is going well at this time. Then the Scout holes, I'll take them as a whole and give you my rationale as to why they're on the paper. Most of these properties were developed with community funding. Most of the buildings, I should say, are on land leased to the Scout Association on longish leases. Most of those leases are now coming up to their termination dates, and due to the new legislation around EPCs, the council is not in a position to grant new leases unless the condition of the current buildings either substantially improved or those buildings are replaced, and we don't have the capital funding to do that. The Scout Association, in comparison, freehold disposal is allowed regardless of the current EPC, and a disposal to the Scout Association would enable the Scouts to access additional funding which the council can't, such as a community ownership fund to improve or rebuild those properties. There's other funds that they can access as well, being landlords. So it's recommended that all these Scout huts are disposed of to the Scout Association, so that they can be protected in the long term for the Scouts' use. Then finally, Appendix 4, which is the village halls. Similar sort of story to the Scout huts, but has its own nuances. Again, the village halls are revenue and capital expensive for the council to run. Last 12 months has seen about £100,000 spent on the village hall portfolio in terms of repairs and maintenance, and the 12 months prior to that there was an additional 85, so nearly £200,000 in 2 years. Again, those committees that run the village halls can't access things like community ownership fund because the asset isn't at risk of loss. Whereas if the asset is at risk due to its quality and degradation, if they were the freeholder, they would be able to access community ownership fund and other funds, including the council's own community fund, which again prohibits applications for buildings where the tenants have a repairing obligation. The situation with these leases as well, they're generally quite restricted in terms of subletting and uses. So a disposal of these properties to their relevant committees would mean that village halls, in my view, would be able to take much more control of their own destiny. They'd have the ability to access funding. They'd have the ability to charge the properties. They'd have the ability to sublet as they see fit and run them potentially more as a business or more with a business approach. And the funding that they can access, the council can't replicate. So it would be a revenue and capital saving for the council, and it would be an opportunity for the village halls in terms of running them long term. And likewise, as with the Scout huts, it would protect them in terms of them being a community asset moving forward. So I think I've spoken enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for your report. That was very helpful. Thank you very much. I think I'll throw it straight open to questions. Does anybody on the committee have any questions? None at all. That's a surprise. Anybody?
Councillor Kemp.
Oh, Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, can I just start by saying I'm not overly clear what it is that we're being asked to do this evening. We're asked to kind of note successes, and then to pass the report to Cabinet. We're not asked to comment on the report. We're not asked to make any recommendations. Can you just clarify what the purpose of bringing this report here is this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Ken. As far as I'm aware, the report was requested to come here, whether that be through the Chair or through Democratic Services, and I think it's probably right in the fact that there is a considerable amount of declaring a surplus of properties, because that's essentially what the report is going to be asking Cabinet.
Okay, so 1.2 tells us that we need to note the success of reviewing delivering revenue savings. Can you tell us what the revenue savings were that were saved last year through asset rationalisation?
Yes, thank you. We've had a number of properties that have been demolished because their uses are no longer been required, or they've been rationalised into other parts of the portfolio. You've got the Richmond Road Community Centre, which is now demolished, which was a revenue saving and will likely be a capital receipt. You've got the Coron Way Depot, which again was an old degraded property being used for Meals on Wheels, which was costing again a lot of revenue to maintain, but was no longer required. So that's been demolished, again savings of revenue and likely to be a housing scheme. Well, hopefully, I know HRA are looking at that one. You've got Richmond Road, which again will hopefully be a HRA scheme as a result of the rationalisation of the portfolio. And there was another one. Obviously, you've got the savings identified at the Thameside, and Averley Children's Centre. Sorry, not Averley Children's Centre. Averley Library and Village Hall, which again, the Village Hall was in such poor condition that it was handed back from the trustees to the council, was closed and demolished, along with the library. The library's been rationalised into the new hub in Averley, again with a revenue saving, and that whole site will be brought forward for a hopefully again a HRA or TRL scheme.
So you can't tell us what the revenue savings are?
I don't have that information with me tonight, Councillor, but I can certainly provide it after the meeting.
Right, okay. When you went through the list that you came out with there, you went through Richmond Road twice. You know, there are those of us who think that was nothing more than municipal vandalism, demolishing a Victorian building that was still being very well used. You mentioned the Thames side, which doesn't appear anywhere in this report. We were led to believe there would be a decision on the Thames side coming back in July. Can you tell us why the Thames side isn't here?
Happy to pick that up. Councillor Kent, as you know, we've been involved in a process with Community Interest Company as they develop their business case to develop a cultural hub at the Thameside complex. As part of that process, we were required, as there is an asset available for transfer, to advertise that. A second expression of interest has come in relation to the Thameside complex, and we're now going through the process of working with that group also to allow them to develop their business plan so that we can assess both. So that process will now run over the summer, with the report coming back towards the end of the summer period, around September, October time. So that's the reason why it's not coming in July.
Okay. And as we go through the appendices, the one that jumps out is Buckingham Hill. It says former landfill site. It is still the landfill site. I think we would all have real concerns about declaring that in any way surplus. There are various others on here that I do have concerns about. Certainly some of the land in Purfleet, with everything that's planned for Purfleet. I just would question whether it's tactically right to be giving up that land. As we move forward, I'll come to start with the Scouts. I really applaud the sentiment behind the idea of allowing those halls to go to a community organisation that is well equipped and well able to continue managing them, organisations with some capacity behind them. I'm really not sure that that's the case for village halls. You know, you've said that in the last 2 years the local authority has had to spend something like £200,000 on the maintenance and the fabric of village halls. I don't know that the various village hall committees and community groups have the wherewithal to be able to do that. And I do just wonder if we're not in danger of giving some organisations a hospital pass and risk seeing some of those buildings fall into decay. Can I just have some comfort that there are going to be a series of kind of one-to-one conversations with each of these groups just to make sure that we're confident they'd have the capacity to take on, run those buildings without letting the fabric deteriorate. Secondly, if following those discussions some groups don't have the wherewithal to do that, I just want some comfort that we're not then going to be saying that those buildings are no longer required by the community and somehow we end up losing them.
Thank you. Forgive me, because I think there was 5 or 6 questions there if I don't cover them all, but I'll start at the top and I think where you were asking from. So Buckingham Hill landfill is actually a former landfill site, the property that surrounds the amenity site. It's about 52 acres. The amenity site itself extends to about 2 acres, and that is clear from the report in terms of the sizes that are presented. It does obviously impact on the amenity site, and I would like to think that colleagues from Environment would welcome a conversation that if a proposal came forward where there was a better use, that the community site could be moved or it could be augmented or improved, because I know there's a recent planning application off the back of generating some revenue from the use of the additional site. So I don't agree with your assessment. It is actually a completely different thing that we're talking about. The Civic Amenity site is only about 2 acres, and it's the remainder of the former landfill site that we're looking at improving so that we can create a better revenue receipt for the council. I think next you asked about Purfleet and in relation to PCRL's developments there, and obviously it's an important project for the council, and we're well aware of that. I think that's why when I presented the item on Corridor Wharf, I highlighted that it would be disposed of on a short-term basis so that it wouldn't impact on PCRL's development. The other property in Purfleet that we're looking at is the Vosa site, which is actually outside of the PCRL's development zone. But likewise, because of the importance of that development, I think it's probably the best time to look at developing that from a residential point of view, so it's hand in glove with PCRL development. I think then it was Scout, which you said you were generally happy with because of the likelihood that they'll be able to run their halls next, was Village Halls. I think there's got to be a substantial amount of work done with colleagues and community, which will come off the back should Cabinet approve the declaring surplus of these assets. And I think that has to be from the approach of facilitating these transfers for the benefit of the community and the benefit of the trustees of the village halls to then support the community use of those halls. And I perfectly accept that not everybody in this situation will have the business acumen or the expertise or the experience to pick up an asset and run with that. And there'll of course be support offered by ourselves in assets or I hope colleagues and communities. But I would like to think that there would also be some sharing of ideas and sharing of passion and sharing of creativity from those village halls that are successful, and there are a number in the borough that are very successful and run very well as businesses. And another boon for them with the result of this Cabinet report, if it's declared surplus, would be that they'd be able to access 100% council tax relief generally, rather than the 85% they get now. So it actually, those ones that are running effectively as businesses will save even more. But I would encourage those village halls, and I'm going to look for buy-in from those village halls to help support the other village halls, because there's a wealth of experience there that needs to be tapped into. And I would hope that would get over most of the humps in terms of transferring these assets to the community to protect them for future use. But if it doesn't, then of course we're not going to force committees to take the freeholds. But I would like to then continue exploring opportunities to facilitate them being able to do that in the near future or the medium term. Does that cover everything, Councillor Kent? Sorry.
Right, thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thank you. What would happen in the case of a leaseholder not actually taking up the freehold? And it's a bit of a two-parter. I mean, how would you actually deal with that situation going forward if someone actually didn't want to take up the offer?
Thank you. Sorry. Sure, sign I've talked too much. Sorry. In that situation, again, we'd like to explore the reasons as to why they're not taking up the freehold. There's already been a number of expressions of interest, people wanting to make community asset transfer requests for various village halls. So there is an appetite from the community to take these buildings, and I think historically there's been less of an appetite for the council to perhaps treat on those terms. So I would hope, generally speaking, it would be met positively, and it would be met with not a stampede, but certainly a decent level of inquiries and acceptance, and acceptance of our offers of assistance. For those who aren't in a position, like I said with my answer to Councillor Kent, we'd look to work with them to find out why they didn't want to take it and whether it was an issue in terms of capability, and if it was, then to enable them to rectify that lack of capability, and then long term, if they're still not interested in taking a disposal of the property, I'd suggest that they still have the leasehold interest, that we could look to renew their leasehold interest so it's a virtual freehold, 99 years, 125 years, and then I would be recommending at that point then to dispose of the freehold still, but for that to be covenanted on the freehold title that it has to remain in community use.
Oh, so it's obviously my understanding by that is the leasehold is always going to be kept safe. They're not going to be turfed out of their property for whatever legal reason. They are protected.
Well, it's difficult to deal in certainties, but we'd certainly make it as cast iron as we could that they would remain within community use. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. It's just going back to Appendix 4 with the village halls. It's quite a large sum of 200,000 for repairs and that. Do they generate any sort of income at all?
Thank you, Councillor Carter. It's a mixed bag. Most of them are let for a peppercorn, which is one or £5. There's a couple that generate an income of about £250 per annum, and then there's again some that actually have a nil consideration, so no rental income. So I think it's in the order of about not even that, £1,500 a year we get in revenue from the leases. But conversely, again, another reason why I think it's pertinent for the council to be disposing of these assets was that we still have the obligation to manage those leases as a prudent landlord. So we still have to undertake the rent reviews, the lease renewals, our compliance. It takes up a lot of officers' time, and within that £200,000 that I've quoted as a potential expenditure over the last 2 years, there's no allocation for officers' time, which on the village halls, because of the number and the age and the type of lease, is considerable.
Thank you. I think this committee does note that they are a very expensive asset, and thank you for your report.
Thank you for that. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the discretion of the chair, because I'm new to the committee, so I might ask some questions that appear a bit basic, so bear with me. I understand that £200,000 is quite a lot, but I would like to say that there is an extraordinary value in supporting our communities, and that amount of money in the considerable sum that the council spends in its overall budget is quite small. So I don't think if we're putting a value on supporting our communities through these buildings, I think that's actually quite a small amount when you kind of take the budget as a whole. My query is with regards to why practically weren't conversations, I guess actually, how many conversations were had with the buildings and the sites who have shown interest versus not, and why weren't those ones put forward? Because it seems like the conversations are happening after it's agreed, and then these sites are going to be put on a list that like an at-risk group, as it was raised. There's nothing can be set in cast iron, so we can't assure groups that can't manage village halls, for example, that they will be okay in those properties. So which of these, out of all of the list, how many have actually shown interest in taking those, and how many are we going to have to kind of support and go forward with information? And I guess as well, building on the comments that have been made already, if I may, with regards to the cost, what information is going to be provided to those organisations about what they're taking on responsibility-wise? So some detailed information about the packs that they're getting, when they'll be getting them, and I guess a detailed timetable of when they'll be receiving that information. And some detail on, you talk about they'll be able to claim money from community ownership funds, council-owned community fund, which seems strange because we're paying them out of a different pot. But how much money will they be able to claim through these schemes that might be able to cover this exorbitant cost that we're trying to offload? Thanks.
Thank you. Like yourself, this is my first overview scrutiny, so I'm also new, so I'm in good company, it would appear. Can I answer kind of in a round, because those questions also tie into one another? From a budget point of view, part of my remit at the moment, and I think most of the council's remit at the moment, is to look at where we can improve our services, but also save revenue, so that those services are protected. And that's part of this approach. That's very much played into all of the assets I've brought forward in this disposal report. So I would argue the opposite. I would argue that £200,000 is a huge amount of money, and would now allow a lot of services to do an awful lot if that money was available to them, or likewise result in cuts that perhaps other services couldn't deal with. So £200,000, I would argue, is a substantial amount of money. But I think the thing with these proposed transfers is that because we are the freeholder, a lot of those funds that are available we can't access, so we have to pay the £200,000, and often that money is being spent where actually the tenant has the repairing obligation, and isn't complying with their repairing obligation, and because it's a council-owned building, there's an assumption that the council will step in and meet the obligation. Whereas the disposal of the freehold very much puts the onus then on the occupier to do what they should have been doing already. And I think that point then it's the education and the support process that's required from the council. You mentioned a pack in terms of what they're taking on. Well, a lot of those liabilities already sit with them, so it's more about actually helping them to understand what funds are available for them, what the responsibilities, very much like our community asset transfer policy. It sets out a very similar thing. They'd have, in terms of a business case, that they have to understand the financial obligations that we put on them and how they can go about meeting those obligations. And I fully accept that there's a lot of education and lots of support required for some, but certainly not all of these village halls, because I think the number, and don't quote me because I'm recalling from my memory, is about 3 or 4 in terms of people who either approach for a community asset transfer or to buy the freehold. And like I said, there's some halls that are very successful. And in my mind, this report is here to try and protect these assets. Because if the leases expire, say, in 15 years' time, there's no guarantee that we will be renewing those leases. And each asset on balance would have to be taken on balance at that point. Whereas what this does is we're essentially ring-fencing village halls, and we would make sure that the titles had restricted covenants on it, dedicating them to the community. So we're protecting them, in my view. So we're protecting them. We're allowing them to have autonomy and access to. You mentioned the community ownership fund. That's one we can't access because it can only be accessed by the freeholder, and it can only be accessed if the property is in distress. So obviously we're the freeholder and we maintain our property as well. So that would never be able to be accessed by us. And I think it's up to £250,000 per application, subject to. And again, I'm remembering the report. So forgive me if it's inaccurate. But it's a substantial amount of money for each hall. Likewise, the CEDL fund, which is the council's own, not CEDL. Sorry, that's the one. Thank you very much, Graham. CEDF fund is prohibitive from people applying where they have a repairing obligation to the council. So again, the CEDF fund could now be accessed by these village halls, which they can't currently. So I'm very much of the view that we should take the opportunity to support these village halls, to enable them to be masters of their own destinies, but likewise protect it for the community. And again, apologies if I've missed something you've raised, so please come back if I haven't.
Yeah, thank you. I think so. If there's any question, I mean, I think it would be helpful to go into the specific. As you say, some of them all already know, but it would be helpful to know what information people are getting in advance to make sure that they've got the information. So what I don't want to happen is all of us councillors will have the people come to us and say, the council have given us this asset, we weren't aware that we had to do X, Y and Z, even if they should have been doing it already, and then we'll direct them to you, and we can say, you can help them, is that right?
Sorry, I did miss answering that one, so apologies, Councillor. It's at the moment nothing has been done in terms of preparing anything for the village halls because I wouldn't want to preempt the cabinet decision. But obviously, once the cabinet make a decision, which they may deem to or not, if it's a positive decision in terms of declaring them surplus, then yes, we would certainly be approaching it in a similar fashion to community asset transfer, where we would be looking for it to be a collaborative approach in forming a business case, and I would hope that process would then sort out the wheat from the chaff, as it were, identify the people who would struggle taking the freeholds on, and then, like I said, we'd look to support them, whether it be shared learning for other community halls that are run successfully, or whether it's in terms of education that we might be able to offer, or assistance. I'm certainly not proposing that we would cut them loose, and I certainly wouldn't propose that from an assets point of view. We'd be here to advise, and they certainly wouldn't be forced to take the asset or appear to have suddenly got the asset without being involved in the process. It's a dual process.
So just a comment then, bearing in mind that obviously if agreed at Cabinet, and that's an if it is agreed, it might be appropriate to come back with these assets in a report at another point in the year, if that's deemed appropriate with officers and new chair.
Thank you for that. I'm mindful that this is quite a significant proposal that we're making, and I also noticed we do have some representatives from the Scouting organisation here this evening. We have a little bit of time left on this. Would either of you gentlemen like to have a 2-minute talk or a little speech about what you feel about the proposals for the Scouts?
Yes, by all means, that's allowed.
I'm the chair, and I'm saying it's allowed, so you're all right.
Graham, do you want to jump in here so that you've got a mic?
Appears to be.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're on.
It's fair to say that generally the Scout movement across the district is very much in favour of this, because as David has said, it doesn't only tie the council up in a lot of time and effort in rent reviews, lease reviews, lease renewals. There's a division because the land is the council's, the buildings are ours. And yes, I'm aware of some of the rules around 21 years, if in the leases, but they aren't generally. So we've got history of maintaining our own buildings. We don't come to the council, ask for money for buildings. We go for the grant route, we fundraise ourselves, and I think we've got a pretty good track record of actually improving our facilities and making them very widely available to the community. We don't see them as a Scout hut. We see them as a building owned by Scout Group, which is then opened up widely for the community. And I think Councillor Carter will know that the Chapel St Mary Scout Group has a full-time nursery in it during the week, which is of benefit, as do others. And a wide range of community groups make use of Scout halls, and indeed our sister organisation, the Guides, because they don't tend to own their own property. They make big use of our buildings where they possibly can, and we really feel this would be a big step forward for us, and cut some ties that stops us doing things. And I think it's right. It would open up more opportunities for us to go for grants that we can't currently go for, especially when we get into the last 7 years of a lease, because we can't get anything then, because the minimum on a grant application is 7 years return on investment. So, I mean, I think we're broadly very much in favour. And again, we'd be quite prepared to assist in the wider area if that was felt useful. We could offer assistance in the village hall areas, because obviously each group has a board of trustees that operates across those buildings, so they have had to undergo training to operate those roles. They are charity trustees. They're fully aware of what their requirements are, and in fact that we do use some of the village halls where Scout groups don't own their own property. So there we go.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. That's been very useful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. As I say, I think that was very useful, and I think certainly from the Scouts' point of view, it's obviously a welcome report. I do take into account Councillor Holloway's view that we maybe should come back later on in the municipal year to have a look at how this has been going, and certainly with regard to the village halls, what the take-up's been like. I think potentially there's the offer's just been made where we could look at maybe a transformation group or something, a transferring group that we can sort out with the Scouts, maybe if they're willing, and put them in touch with the various people that might be unsure about what to do. So I think that's probably something we should look into, taking them up on their offer. Right, okay, any more questions before we carry on? No, I think that seems to be it, in which case we'll move on to the recommendations on page 14. We have recommendations 1.1 through to 1.3. Shall we take them as read? And do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed. Yep.
Yeah. In that case, the minutes are agreed. The recommendations are agreed. Thank you. Okay, so we move on to item 6, which is the end-of-year corporate performance report 2021-2022, found on pages 75 to 96 of the agenda. Can I ask Sarah Welton to present, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so you'll see from the report that at end of year, 67.5% of indicators were achieving target. That's better than 2020-21, but lower overall than pre-COVID positions. So as I'm sure we're all remembering that 2021-22, whilst not having the disruption that we saw in 2020-21, there were the service delivery in some areas was still impacted by COVID, and where that is the case, it is referenced in the report. That being said, and obviously you see latest data on COVID rates, but we don't anticipate, we hopefully won't be anticipating having a separate section within future reports on specifically on COVID. But if there is any hangover, if I can use the word, or residual impact on individual indicators into 22-23, then obviously that will be referenced in reports moving forward. As well as the familiar format of the KPI details that we've had in previous reports during the year, which also includes the commentary against every one of the indicators that is red or failed. As it's the end of year report, you'll also see that there's some qualitative highlights let me just check that at 3.4 of some of the highlights through the year that aren't necessarily something that you can put a statistic against. I won't go into any further detail. I'm sure there's questions that I'm happy to answer, and if I don't have the level of detail that's needed, I'll go back to services and get that for you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your report. We'll go straight to questions. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Kemp.
I've got three of these indicators that I'd like to look at. So on page 79, percentage of refuse bins emptied on the correct day. We're told that the end of year out term was 99.95% of bins were collected on the right day. Can you tell me how that KPI has been put together, please?
I'm just checking my pages because I've got different page numbers. So this is on 3.5, yes? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So on this particular indicator, it didn't, as I remember, didn't include April and May, where you may remember there was some industrial action taking place. But it did include all the other months' worth of data. It is based on the information that goes through the collection team, as I understand it.
Okay. So, you know, I take my hat off to the men and women who actually do the job and empty the bins. On you know, kind of heat we've had the last week or so, even at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's warm. You get into December, it's freezing, it's icy, it's snowing, they're still out there most of the time collecting bins. And in a place like Thurrock, if we just chunk it, 60,000 properties, 2.5 bins emptied every week, that's something like 150,000 bins emptied a week, 7.8 million a year. So to collect the vast majority on the right day is a real achievement and always is. I'm just find it really odd, though, that we can say, here's the KPI, it's really good because we've taken out all those weeks when we weren't emptying the bins. That can't be right. And even if that is right, if you take that figure of 7.8 million, that means that over the course of the year, that there were fewer than 4,000 missed bins. You know, I just don't accept that that's right. And I really would like to understand how it can be that we can take out those 6 weeks when nobody got their bins emptied. Explain to me how that's right.
All I can say is that that is how it's reported all the way back from Q1. So the information was reflected in Q1 as well. So with the monthly data was there as well. So I cannot tell you exactly how many bins, but I know there were many thousands of bins that are collected on a daily basis. I can only report on the information that I'm given. I have no reason to believe that it's not right.
Okay. I just, you know, many indicators would be much better if we just ignored those times where we couldn't do it. I just find that just bizarre. Next on page 81, payment of fixed penalty notices. You know, this is still a huge problem. It's still just about every other fixed penalty notice that is issued isn't paid. And we're seeing very little progress on it. We're told in the route to green, the very last thing, fixed penalty notices, people are at liberty not to pay the fixed penalty notice but to attend court. Have we got any idea how many people do actually do that rather than just pay the notice?
I don't have the individual data on individual cases, no, I'm afraid.
Excuse me, Sarah. Use your mic.
My apologies, and hopefully it was picked up. My voice was picked up from the last one. My apologies. I don't have that specific data on here. If that's something that you would like to get, I will ask the service if we're able to get that.
I think it would be useful because it's a line in there that kind of almost says this is part of the reason that we're doing so poorly on this indicator. You know, I don't think it is, but I'd like to know. Finally, for me, it's page 84. Number of new apprenticeships started, including existing staff, and we're told that has failed. 46 new starts. Can you tell me how many of those apprenticeships are completed?
My apologies. No, I can't of those specific ones, but they're 18-month apprentices in most cases, if not all. So some of those will have started the year before. Some of them will have started this year. So I don't think it would be. If I did know, if for instance I knew it was 40, that wouldn't necessarily give you the answer you needed.
So at the moment, 50% of Thurrock Council apprenticeships aren't completed. That's 50% don't reach the endpoint assessment. And the biggest reason for that is that as we've been holding vacancies, people are moving from being an apprentice to a full-time member of the team. That has two impacts. That has an impact on Thurrock Adult Community College, which is the council's partner in apprenticeships. Because they're not getting people to the endpoint assessment, they're losing funding. And it also means that those people aren't getting the qualification that will stand them in good stead in the future. So I'd like, Chair, for us to kind of look at two things, if we can. One is to ask that this KPI includes completions as well as starts, so that we can actually measure how many people are completing those apprenticeships. But I'd also like us to recommend to Cabinet that when we are taking people that are currently apprenticeships and making them permanent members of the team, that the council encourages them to complete the apprenticeship anyway, so that they get the qualification and the adult college doesn't lose the funding.
You obviously have some data there that I don't have.
I'm one of the local authority governors at the college. Okay,
because obviously this also includes current members of staff who are taking apprentices as well. So that in most cases, I think they would continue in their role. So they'd complete their apprentice and then continue in their role, is my understanding. As certainly now I've got somebody within my own team to whom that applies. I can take back the information. I can't comment on the data you've got because it's not something that I have, but I can take back the information and ask the service for more information on that. But the issue about the showing completions is slightly skewed because most of them are over a year, so it would be out of the yearly timeline. So we'd have to have a look at how best to reflect that in a stat if it goes over more than one reporting year.
But we must be able to do that. There are plenty of KPIs that spread beyond a year. So if you look off the top of my head and without looking from a child being taken into care to being given a permanent fostership, that's usually well over 400 days.
Yes, so that would be so that you'd have a rolling average. So we'd have to have a quick look at how we can provide that information. Thank you.
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know if I can just pick up on something that Councillor Kenn's just said. I mean, I am new to this committee and in fact new to the council. It's just a comment on what's just been mentioned. I mean, I myself have actually gone through an apprenticeship. I did go full term, but it kind of strikes me that surely if an apprentice is actually promoted to a full-time position, that is actually a testament to the right candidate being chosen in the first place, or he's shown particular skills where he then can progress further. So I'm just sort of picking up on that point, not really understanding why that is a relevant case to actually come up with. Do you see what I mean? I actually can't understand that, knowing that I've gone through an apprenticeship myself, and I probably myself could have gone to a properly qualified position within that period, but in my case, I couldn't.
I'm not sure there was a question
No,
there.
it wasn't. It was
a comment. Yeah, Councillor Kent.
If I can clarify, it's for two reasons. If an apprenticeship isn't completed, you don't get to the endpoint assessment, then the college that is partnering with the authority to deliver the apprenticeship loses funding because it hasn't completed. The second is, and you know, I took a trade apprenticeship a long time ago. It was a different world then. The apprenticeship is a level 3 qualification. And if the individual hasn't completed the endpoint assessment, they don't get the level 3 qualification, which may hinder them later on in their career. So all I'm suggesting is that we should encourage people, if they have moved on to a better thing within the authority, to finish the course and get their qualification.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Kent. Do we have anybody else? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. I was just I wouldn't go on as many specific ones, but I'd like to say that there's a lot that have been achieved, and if you look in the fine detail, there are some that have been targets achieved, but way higher than the targeted area for it. I'll pick one as an example. On page 79, number of hubs/libraries, events, activities, supporting engagement in cultural, social learning opportunities for wellbeing and strengthen community connections. The target was 360, and the end of year outrun was 1,261. So I think there are some places where we've gone way above our target, and that should be congratulated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I'm not sure there was a question there either. But any more questions, or should we move on? I think Councillor Carter's basically right. There's an awful lot the council does, and there's an awful lot the council gets right. There are things that we're not doing quite as well as maybe we should. I do take Councillor Kent's point a little bit with regard to the lack of information that we get back from officers sometimes. I mean, the committee, to me, it seems quite obvious that you can look at an agenda sometimes and have a good guess at what's going to come up. And I think we do need the information on the night if you've got it. I don't think it's really good enough to come here with lots of, well, I don't really knows. So what I would like to see is the information that Councillor Kent asked, the information given and circulated to committee at the earliest possible convenience, so we can have a look at that in the round. I think as well, in terms of, there's a lot of things that have been impacted with COVID, and I know you mentioned that that we're going to be coming out of that COVID era pretty soon, and that's a good thing. I think we all appreciate things were impacted heavily with COVID, and we understand that. But I think now we should also by now have learned how we deal with this sort of thing in future. So if we have a similar circumstance, we should deal with it a lot better. And I would like to think that we've taken some learning from the events of the past couple of years as well. So, but on the whole, yeah, it's an okay report. I think the information that's missing is important, and as I say, we can circulate that at the earliest available opportunity. Now, I know Councillor Hebb's with us tonight, and we've got some time. So, Councillor Hebb, have you got a few things to say?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Appreciate you praying my indulgence. I didn't necessarily intend to speak on this tonight because I'm actually here for the work plan, but incidentally, I'm here for this. And I took a step back and watched that discussion because, having sort of attended some of these committees now for some time, there's some typical themes, namely that questions are asked and they're quite rightly asked, and seldom are the answers been able to be conveyed back. And I don't think that's a reflection of Sarah. I think it's the reflection that she's been put in. And I remember being the chair of this committee myself, and I used to, when there was a red flag performance or whatever we used to call it back then, we used to make sure that the relevant service leads were here to answer the questions. And, respectfully, my recommendation to you all as a committee is perhaps put a recommendation in that you want the service leads here. to answer those questions. I think, frankly, if the KPI report is going to be here, then you should have that. You know, Councillor Kent, you've asked a couple of those questions 2 or 3 times in the times that I've been sort of watching this committee, and you haven't really had the answers. And I think things can be better and need to be better. So I hope you don't mind my counsel on that. It's not me imparting on you, it's just a suggestion. I'll talk a little bit more in a short while about some of the work that I'm going to hopefully ask and hopefully you'll agree to. But part of the work, one of the recommendations in here is about to refresh or to look at a piece of work about refreshing the vision and the emerging KPIs. We are now living in a world where Thames Freeport is at full business case stage on a minister's desk. We've got, you know, circa £95 million worth of revenue or support from the government in terms of the towns funds across Tilbury and Grays. And there was a conversation, I think it was at the last meeting, where it was talking about what is Thurrock's, how will Thurrock operate in the next 5 years in terms of the devolution deals, and, you know, who knows what's going on with that in this day and age. But there is a question to be asked around how Thurrock is going to run itself or be part of a wider governance model, as I think it was Councillor Coxall and Kent was sort of musing on last time. But also reflecting on the fact that there is some major growth investment coming into this borough through Freeports and everything else. And we probably need to take stock of a vision that's now 6 years old, pre-COVID, and have a look at what the modern Thurrock looks like and what we want to measure ourselves on. And just reflecting again on the whole piece, I think that there needs to be a split. For me, there needs to be a focus on the 12-month KPIs, so how do we do month on month? But there's some questions that need to be asked, and I think that will probably come to this committee later on in the year in terms of what that framework looks like. But, you know, are we measuring the right things? Are we measuring in the right way? Do they push hard enough, some of them? Or, frankly, are we kidding ourselves and are we never going to achieve that? And just have a bit of reality check. So there's an opportunity to review that. But the other thing, and I think members will warm to this idea, is the move to having, I wouldn't necessarily call it 2 separate scorecards, but certainly a bigger focus on longer term projects, because major projects are not ring-fenced to 12-month municipal diaries. They will not finish necessarily on the 30th of April or 31st of April every year. They will transcend years, 2 years, 3 years, but they are key stage gates or milestones, whatever you want to use, in those projects, which members should have visibility of to say whether a project is either slipping behind or perhaps getting in front of itself. And I think there's a piece of work to do through this work this year, certainly about growing that and making sure that there is that short-term operational, how are we doing with the bins, how are we doing with apprenticeships, but then also, if we've got major projects going on, what are the milestones that are anticipated over the medium to longer term, and if there's slippage, we can intercept it pretty quickly. Then us as elected members can see that quicker and then put our challenges into the relevant directions. So there wasn't a question there, it was just volunteer.
Absolutely fine. Thank you for that, Councillor Head. Okay, with that, we go to the recommendations on page 76, 1.1 to 1.3. 1.3 basically touching on what Councillor Head's just said pretty much, so we can look at that in the future. Does everybody agree the recommendations?
Yeah,
agreed. That's the recommendations agreed. Excellent. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is the work programme on pages 97 to 98. I think I shall bring in Councillor Head first on this, because I know he's got a few things he would like to add. Councillor Head.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for praying my indulgence again. I think it was Councillor Churchman who chaired the meeting last year when I come and asked for a few things, and you kindly consented to them all. And I'm not sort of suggesting that you have to, but hopefully you will do, for the obvious reasons. There's 3 things I'd like to recommend for the work programme. Again, like I said last year, I'd leave it to yourselves to determine if or when, and when rather, we'd look to do that, but just a few things. One, an analysis of the inquiries which come in from residents and elected members. So the proposal is to receive a report from officers on the various interactions that service users and elected members have with the council, which allows the committee to identify any emerging themes and propose any recommendations of any detailed work that would come out of that in terms of recommendations. And that may or could include customer service calls and emails, members' inquiries calls and emails, complaints and compliments. So if there's any emerging themes that are coming out that I think you should have visibility of that anyway, and then obviously you can fire in your recommendations and feedback into Cabinet. That would be a helpful exercise if you agree. The second one is around customer service, including a potential Thurrock app in the medium to long term, I stress. I don't know about you lot, but you've got like banking apps, haven't you? And it's got all the whole, you can check how much you've paid your mortgage, or you can apply for this, or you can check your statement from 30 years ago and all that sort of stuff. There is technology that is emerging quite rapidly, and there are some people that don't work Monday to Friday 9 till 5, haven't got access to the building, who, on a Sunday night or whatever, want to go and do these things. So there's a whole question around customer service, not a question, sorry, there's a discussion to be had around how far we can go with customer service. We need to make sure that there is the face-to-face support, and I'm really clear with that. And I was meant to be asked a question by Councillor Collins last month, but he was poorly, unfortunately, bless him. But also, how far can the digital side of the customer service offer go? So hopefully you'll be happy to receive a paper, and I'd love your brain dump and thoughts as to how far that approach could go. And then lastly, a senior officer performance framework discussion. So to receive a report with options from officers of how members currently and could further contribute to the Chief Executive and Senior Officer performance appraisals. So they're the three I want to put forward on top of the corporate framework, which is, I think, already in here looking at 6th of October. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. And before you shoot off, I'd like to extend an invitation to you to, whenever we have committee, turn up, every one of you if you so desire, or none of them if you so desire. Okay, anybody got any thoughts on Councillor Hebb's suggestions before we go any further? No? Okay, well, I mean, I think they're all pretty reasonable. I'm intrigued with the idea of a customer services app. I mean, yes, we must never lose focus of the face-to-face element of what we do. But you are right, is that as time goes on, we're increasingly looking more at our phones than we are doing anything else. And, yeah, maybe that's the way to go in the future. I know certainly my dad, who's coming up with 79, he's using his phone like a teenager these days, and he's moved well away from his laptop, and he just uses his phone and his tablet. So maybe that's something we could look at and get a report on, a feasibility study at the very least, at some point in the future. I mean, we're looking pretty light in December. We could have one by then, maybe, or is that too soon, do you think? What do you think? Lucy, what do you reckon? Is that too soon?
Yeah, well, I can work with officers to see when a report would be ready and when it would be suitable. So I can always, have a chat with officers and see if we can fit it in December.
Okay, and the analysis of inquiries, I think that's also probably worth looking at too. So I think if we can have a word with officers about that one and see if that's something that they can have a look at and bring a report into at some point. I'll leave you to liaise with them to decide when they could potentially do that. Senior officer performance appraisal, yeah, maybe we could have a look at that, but that's probably sits better at a different committee perhaps, but I'm not sure about that one, Councillor Hebb, but we'll see. Only because I'd like to sort of make room for the return of the disposals list and find out how we're getting on with those later on in the municipal year as well. I think we need to find time for that, maybe in February or something like that. Yeah, of course.
I expect to bring a further asset review report probably early in the new year, so it could be part of that could be a review of where we've got to with the others declared surplus already.
That's excellent news. Yeah, we will look forward to that. That's all the way.
Sorry, not items I'd like to add, but just a note to ask that when there's update reports, again, as a member of the committee, either if the officers responsible can send the original report for us to read in advance, or present as if we haven't been sitting here for a year and already had the report, because otherwise it's confusing and we can't contribute properly. And then just to add on the items that Councillor Hebb has brought up, I'd be happy for all of them to be brought to the agenda, and especially looking at what's on the December, looking at what's on the December agenda, bearing in mind, I think that we could fit 3 additional reports on there because it's a similar number of reports to the October, if that's feasible. So I'd support that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good shout about getting the reports in advance. That's a good idea. And Councillor Hebb's last idea has been salvaged, and so we can have a look at that one as well, as we probably do at the time. If we don't have the time, I keep looking at Kenna, but it's actually Lucy. We've got sort of Care Lucy today. So, yeah, we can look at that one as well and see what the feasibility is of fitting that in at some stage. December does look a little bit light at the moment, but sometimes that's deceptive, as we all know. Right.
Yeah, I'll have a chat with officers and see if we can fit it all in the work programme.
Excellent. Anybody else got anything further to say, to add? No? Okay. In which case, that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. It's now 8:05, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.